I'm Pam Macklin. I teach at Boerne High School in Missouri. I teach mathematics, and I've been teaching for 16 years. The activity starts with the students doing a review of what equations are in the Cartesian plane and just basic information of the Cartesian plane. And then we go into manipulating equations and changing an equation into slope-intercept form and then matching a graph to that equation. Then we went from there to graphing our own equation, and then we did an application of that in a tutorial through Green Glob's computer program. From that, we went to an internet project, and they gathered data, and they're going to create their own graph from that, and then they'll do a journal entry. The goal is for the students to be able to take an equation and turn it into slope-intercept form and write a linear equation from that. And then I want them to be able to graph that and understand how that data is coming in and why it's happening the way that it's happening, and then the applications of it. Part of the assessment came today. They didn't realize it, but as we went through, they were doing peer assessments when they did their corners activity. They also assessed each other as they were working on the graphs and creating the graphs. And then the Green Glob's equation was a tutorial in which they have an assessment whether or not they can write an equation from a graph. And then the journal will also be an assessment of an understanding of and why things are the way they are and applications of it. And then later on, at the end of the chapter, there's going to be a chapter test, just a typical chapter test. The Green Globs had a rubric that went with it because of the levels, and then each child creates their own score by going across the levels, and if they don't write the right equation, then they're going to lose points. So they lose points as they miss graphs. Each graph comes up, and the students are to write an equation, and if they get the right equation, then it's going to plot that equation with a blue line. If they do not, then it's going to go ahead and graph the equation that they have with a red line, and then there's where they lose their first point. They have to continue writing the equations until they get it correct, and then they're going to go to that same level with a new screen, a new graph, and that continues until they get one correct the first time. Parts of it, I had added the internet lesson, and that was an addition too. That's why it took so much longer today. But it doesn't hurt them, and I've done this before. Teach the lesson in the fall, reteach it in the spring, because it's such an important lesson and skill that they're going to have to be able to do. And they didn't seem to be on top of everything anyway. I'm teaching algebra to students who typically would not have had algebra. The students that you see on here are not your typically classed algebra students. They would have been your general math students, most of them. And they are now being able to take these concepts when broken down into small bites like this and to consume them and possibly be able to go on to a four-year college. I like to be able to make things as meaningful to the students as possible. I want them to be able to take an experience of an activity that we've done and put that in their memory bank and be able to pull that up easily as far as being able to recall a concept. I want to give them something to connect it to. And so many of the kids, especially the ones that I have in the lower levels, are not going to be able to think as abstractly. And so if I give them something concrete, then they're going to be able to move on and use it later. The critical thinking is going to be there because they're taking and using and applying what we've done. And so they're going to be processing and putting to use the concepts that they've been taught. So it's going to be an actual processing of the thinking. The power sharing and empowerment, I think, is there too because they're teaching in the corners activity when they went back and they taught each other how to do. Some of them were still wanting to correct other people. And I've seen this many, many times. So many times when I work in groups, I see kids that typically would have been pushed aside are now going to be the smart person in that group. And it gives everybody a chance at some point in time to be the smart person.